For over 4 long months, the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan has left a community in heartbreak and a nation searching for answers. From the very first day they were reported missing, neighbors, investigators, and countless volunteers poured their energy into finding 2 young children who seemed to vanish without a trace. The case grew into one of the most closely followed investigations in Canada, sparking national attention and international concern. And now, a major development has changed the course of this story. Authorities have confirmed the arrests of Daniel and Malia Sullivan in direct connection to the case. For many, this moment feels like both a breakthrough and a painful reminder of the weight this family tragedy has carried. The question now is what led investigators to this decision, and what comes next as the case moves from unanswered mystery into the courts. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice. Because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice. We've just crossed 5,000 subscribers, all because of your support, and we need that same energy to reach 6,000, then 7,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button, and definitely where you're watching from, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that stands and fights for justice together. After months of questions, searches, and unanswered concerns, a major development has finally come in the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan. Today, Daniel and Malia Sullivan stand under arrest in direct connection to this case. For a community that has lived in uncertainty since May 2nd, this moment feels both heavy and significant. It marks a turning point in an investigation that once seemed stalled, raising new questions about what investigators uncovered behind the scenes. How did we get here? What evidence or patterns led law enforcement to take this decisive step? And most importantly, what does this mean for the ongoing pursuit of answers about Lily and Jack? In this video, we'll carefully retrace the timeline, examine the investigation, and explore what comes next, because while arrests bring clarity, they are only one part of a much larger story. To understand the weight of today's development, we need to step back and revisit how this case first began. On May 2, 2025, Lily Sullivan, just 6 years old, and her younger brother Jack, only 4, were reported missing from their rural home in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. What started as a family concern quickly escalated into one of the most urgent and extensive search operations the province had ever seen. Within hours, search teams were on the ground. Over the following days, helicopters circled overhead, drones scanned the landscape, and trained canine units worked tirelessly alongside ground crews. In total, more than 160 searchers were deployed to cover miles of rugged terrain surrounding the family's home. Despite the intensity of those efforts, no trace of Lily and Jack was found. By the end of that first week, the scale of the search remained massive, but the results were heartbreaking. There were no clear answers, and the children's whereabouts remained unknown. The case quickly drew national attention. Media outlets across Canada covered every update, and nearly 500 tips were submitted by members of the public hoping to help. Some leads seemed promising at first, but time after time, investigators reached dead ends. What once began as a case fueled by urgency gradually shifted into one marked by uncertainty. Yet through it all, the emotional connection never faded. Families across the country felt the weight of this story. Parents held their own children a little closer, communities in Nova Scotia organized vigils, and online groups dedicated themselves to tracking every available update. This was never just a local story, it became a collective concern. Lily and Jack's names were spoken in households far beyond Nova Scotia, their faces shared across social media, their story becoming a symbol of the questions that kept so many awake at night. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the initial hope that Lily and Jack might be quickly found began to fade. With no confirmed sightings and little physical evidence to work with, attention gradually shifted toward the environment closest to the children, their own household. Community conversations reflected this shift. Neighbors recalled small details that, when pieced together, painted a picture that many found difficult to ignore. Some spoke about unusual behavior they had observed around the property in the days leading up to the disappearance. Others mentioned inconsistencies between what was said publicly and what they themselves remembered. Perhaps most unsettling of all was the silence, moments when many expected emotional appeals or open calls for help, but instead there was very little. Daniel and Malia Sullivan soon became central figures in these conversations. In most cases like this, parents or guardians step into the public eye, pleading for answers and making repeated appeals to the community. Here, however, that wasn't what the public saw. The absence of those kinds of visible gestures drew significant scrutiny. Of course, speculation alone is never proof, but in a case already filled with uncertainty, these observations added layers of unease. Investigators are always cautious about community theories, but they cannot ignore consistent concerns voiced by those closest to the situation. As more questions surfaced, the quiet weight of suspicion began pressing down, both on the household itself and on the investigators tasked with finding the truth. This constant pressure created a unique dynamic. On one hand, the RCMP urged the public to remain patient and to allow evidence, not rumor, to guide the investigation. On the other, the very lack of answers meant that community discussions, online forums, and even casual conversations continued to circle back to the same point. Could the key to understanding what happened to Lily and Jack lie within their own home? This week, after months of uncertainty, the investigation took a decisive turn. Authorities confirmed that Daniel and Malia Sullivan were taken into custody in connection with the disappearance of Lily and Jack. For a case that had long been treated as a missing persons investigation, this moment marked a dramatic shift, one that introduced direct accountability into a story defined by silence and unanswered questions. The RCMP, in their official announcement, emphasized the seriousness of this step. They reminded the public that an arrest does not equal guilt. Instead, it reflects that investigators had gathered sufficient evidence to move the case forward through the legal process. In Canada, as in many places, charges represent a beginning point for the courts, not a conclusion. The presumption of innocence remains, and it will be the responsibility of the judicial system to weigh the facts. What authorities did make clear, however, is that this development was not sudden. It was the product of persistence, hundreds of interviews, careful reviews of surveillance, examinations of tips, and the tireless work of investigators who refused to let this case fade into the background. Every detail mattered. Each piece of information, no matter how small, contributed to building a clearer picture of what may have happened. Law enforcement also acknowledged the role of the public. Nearly 500 tips had been submitted since the very beginning of the search. While not every lead proved useful, the collective effort of a community unwilling to stay silent ensured that investigators were constantly moving forward. For those who have followed this case closely, the arrests represent both progress and pain. Progress because after months of waiting, there is now movement toward answers. Pain because the reality of arrests within the household underscores just how heavy this tragedy has become. The question now shifts from speculation to evidence, from silence to testimony, and from uncertainty to the long process of legal accountability. The arrests sparked a wave of emotions, relief that progress had finally been made, but also renewed heartbreak that it came at such a cost. For the small community in Pictou County, the developments were felt most intensely. Neighbors who had searched shoulder to shoulder in the early days described a mix of shock and sorrow. For many, the hope had always been that Lily and Jack would be found safe. The news of arrests made it clear that this outcome was far more complex and painful than they had wished. Grief came in quiet ways, at vigils and conversations between families, and in the voices of community leaders who reminded residents to support one another. Relief also surfaced, not because the story had reached its conclusion, but because there was finally movement in a case that had seemed frozen for months. Progress, even when painful, meant that answers could no longer be postponed indefinitely. The impact stretched far beyond Nova Scotia. Across Canada and even internationally, the Sullivan case had drawn attention. Headlines carried the update, and news outlets emphasized how deeply the story resonated with parents, families, and communities everywhere. The disappearance of two young children was never just a regional concern, it had become a matter that people across the country felt connected to. But perhaps the most difficult response came from the sense of betrayal many expressed. When those closest to the children are brought into the center of an investigation, it stirs emotions that are hard to process. Trust is shaken. The image of family as a place of safety feels challenged. While the courts will determine what is true and what is not, the very fact that arrests were made within the household left many feeling unsettled and deeply saddened. In the end, the community's reaction reflected the weight of the moment: sorrow for what was lost, relief that progress had been made, and a collective determination to continue seeking the truth for Lily and Jack. With Daniel and Malia Sullivan now under arrest, the focus of the case shifts from speculation to the courts. The investigation is far from over. In fact, this stage is often where the most critical details come to light. The RCMP has confirmed that the legal process will now take the lead. That means court appearances, the formal presentation of evidence, and the careful evaluation of what investigators have uncovered so far. It is important to remember that an arrest is not a conclusion. It is the beginning of a legal process designed to test and examine every claim. For investigators, the work continues. Evidence will be reviewed again, timelines reconstructed, and witness statements revisited to ensure nothing has been overlooked. The search for answers about Lily and Jack remains central. Even with arrests made, their whereabouts and the circumstances of their disappearance are questions that must still be fully resolved. For the community, this stage brings a different kind of weighting. The large-scale searches may have ended, but now attention turns to the courtroom, where developments will unfold more slowly. Each appearance, each filing, and each statement carries weight. Small details may provide the clarity that so many have been hoping for. On a national level, the Sullivan case will continue to be followed closely. Legal proceedings will draw public attention, and discussions will continue about how communities and institutions respond in situations like this. For many, this case has already highlighted the importance of persistence, transparency, and collective effort in the face of tragedy. The road ahead is still long, but there is one certainty: every step forward brings us closer to understanding what happened to Lily and Jack, and to finding the accountability and closure that their community, and indeed the nation, has been seeking. At the center of every headline, every search, and every courtroom development are two children, Lily and Jack Sullivan. From the very beginning, this case has not only been about an investigation, but about the lives of two young siblings whose disappearance touched people far beyond their own community. The arrests of Daniel and Malia Sullivan mark a turning point, but they are not the end of the story. The legal process will continue, evidence will be examined, and questions will still need answers. For many, the hope remains that clarity, accountability, and ultimately justice will follow. What we know for certain is that this case has shown the power of persistence, of investigators who refused to give up, of neighbors who stood together, and of people across the country who refused to let Lily and Jack's names fade from public memory. As the case now enters the courts, the world will continue to watch closely. The truth may not always come quickly, but it does leave a trail, and every step brings us closer to understanding what really happened. If you've been following this case and want to stay updated on every development, make sure to subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and join us as we continue to follow the story of Lily and Jack Sullivan.